beyond the edge of reality lies a story of ultimate conquest, a story of war and friendship, a story of a love that can never be, and a hatred that always was. And now, the most anticipated epic adventure of the year will never come to a theater near you. Final Fantasy VII.
PlayStation. Hey guys, welcome to a special video. Today I wanted to talk about a game that I had recently played on the PlayStation 4, which was, well, this game right here. Do you remember this, ladies and gentlemen? Final Fantasy VII. And why I decided to play this again on the PS4, they just released it, I think it was last year or something, or early this year, or I don't remember exactly. But really unique because they added 3 different game modifiers. One of them was essentially like a god mode, so your active time battle meter basically would be like ping, like right away full up. Your health and your magic points would basically do the same thing. They'd be like and they would quickly just always stay at 100%. You could still get one-shotted though, because let's say you had 100 HP and the enemy hit for 200, well, you're dead. But if it hit you for 99, you'd have 1 HP, but it would just go shunk right back to 100%. And the other thing was your limit breaks would always be active, so you could trigger limit break after limit break after limit break. The other mode was no random encounters, and finally, what was the other one? God mode. No random encounter. Oh, and 3 times quicker. So the game was like running in fast forward. And if you played the game with all of these different modifiers on, you could basically blast through the whole game in like, I don't know, probably under 10 hours or so. It's crazy. And it was funny because Steven was asking me, well, how would you be able to fight bosses and stuff? You can. Believe me, you can. You don't even need to level up. Like, you just go. Because there's some battles that you're forced to play, and if you use your limit breaks and you just keep going like that, you can blast through anything in pretty much one round of your team will take out anything. And yeah, bosses will be a little bit harder or whatnot, but not enough to kill you, because you're always going to be at that 100%. So long as a boss doesn't hit more than your standard HP, you should be fine. I actually got into it so much so that I went and I got the Platinum Trophy for it, and that took some time. That took about maybe, I want to say like 22 hours, something like that, which is still crazy. That's so short compared to the 120 hours that I put into the original, into this game all those years ago. And it's been almost 20 years since that game came out. I've got a little paper here of a few things that I wanted to talk about with this game to sort of set the setting, because going through it again and playing it again, I realized like, wow, this really was an influential game, so much so that people really don't realize today. Excuse me. So here's the setting, right? 1997, Super Mario 64 is already out, right? If you weren't following magazines at that particular point in time, you most likely thought Final Fantasy would arrive on the Nintendo 64. I mean, that was the way it was, right? Everything was on Nintendo back in those days. But if you were following EGM and PSM and other magazines like that at the time, Chris Slate, very, very funny that, people were really excited for the next Final Fantasy. And the reason why was all these cinematics. And what's so crazy were those original commercials. There were 3 core commercials that were released, that I recall anyway. They're on YouTube. And if I can, I'll edit them into this video somehow, if I can actually find some. But they were epic videos, and they didn't show the game at all. They just showed the cinematics, which I always thought was so funny.
An evil empire is sucking the life force from the planet. destroying all that's in its path. It's up to one soldier of fortune to save the world. If he succeeds, you survive. If he fails, you can always hit the reset button. Final Fantasy VII.
PlayStation.
Because now, looking back, you're like, well, that's not even the game. That's just cinematics, whatever. But I remember watching those things on TV going, boom, mind blown. What? Because cinematics like this, you just didn't see stuff like that. It did not exist at the time, anyway. And I remember being floored. I also remember that at bus stops, city bus stops, there was that classic white background where you just saw a cloud standing there like da-da-da-da, and with this big huge sword. And I remember just everyone was so damn excited about this game. And I recall, myself included, I was super stoked for this. But I recall magazines at the time. I remember them saying, like, if this game were on cartridge, it would cost like $1,200. And the reason why they're saying that is because of the sheer volume that the game took up. It was on 3 discs, as it says so right there on the box. And at the time, I forget what the ratio is, like how many more times CDs could hold different game data compared to cartridges, but it was like a significant amount, like 5 times, 10 times, 50 times. I don't remember exactly what it is. And that's the idea of the $1,200 thing, basically saying that, you know, it would require like 50 cartridges in order to get this game on cartridge. And I remember that this game very quickly became synonymous with PlayStation. Like this became why you bought a PlayStation in 1997. I mean, there were other really big games at the time. There were Ridge Racer, there was Tomb Raider, even though it had originally launched on Saturn first, people associated Lara Croft with PlayStation. And of course there was Resident Evil, another big one. But it wasn't until Final Fantasy VII where I think everything changed. Like, everything. It was almost like overnight. The PlayStation became the de facto console. And I don't care about sales and like what it was before and after or whatever. All I'm saying is that when this game released, it literally changed everything for the genre of RPGs and also for the PlayStation brand itself. It just, everything changed. And I remember, I just wanted to talk a little bit, yeah, you see, here, in one of the magazine ads that I found, it was like, the ad said, quite possibly the greatest game ever made is available only on PlayStation. Good thing. If it were available on cartridge, it'd retail for $1,200. Never underestimate the power of PlayStation. And that really sums up the hype behind Final Fantasy VII. And you have to remember that during the NES time in North America, and I can only talk about North America because that's where I live, RPGs were really a niche genre. During the NES era, you had your Mega Mans, your Castlevanias, your Super Marios, your Legend of Zeldas. That was like the crux of it. That's what everybody was playing. Your Dragon Warriors in Final Fantasy, on the other hand, were exceedingly rare. Very few people really got into those type of games. During the Super Nintendo time, I always say it was Enix's biggest mistake for leaving North America at that point in time, because it was when things started to change. It's when people's ideas of what it meant to play an RPG slowly started to change. And I think it's important to really emphasize that slowly started to change. Because Final Fantasy 2 and 3, or 4 and 6, as they really are, on the Super Nintendo did not sell millions of units, you know? They did okay. The same thing with like Super Mario RPG, Chrono Trigger, Secret of Mana, although Secret of Mana less, because Secret of Mana is more of an action RPG than a full-fledged RPG. But yeah, as amazing as Chrono Trigger is, really, the truth is, how many copies did that really sell in North America? Not many, and it's the truth. It didn't. It wasn't like 5 million sales or something like that. And that really does put things into perspective. But remember that on the NES, moving into the Super NES, and you could say the same thing with the Master System and Genesis, it doesn't really matter. But when you move from one platform to the other, there was a definite uptake. Like the amount of people that were playing certainly increased. So the sales were on a climb. And it's just so unfortunate that Enix was like, oh, well, screw it, because I would have loved to have seen Dragon Warrior 5 and 6, and then, of course, the remastered ones and everything else come out in North America, but alas, it never happened. And by them leaving, they gave the market to Square. And Square basically went nuts. I mean, they released so many excellent Super Nintendo RPGs that it was just unbelievable. But it was that build-up to the next generation. Essentially, it was the build-up to this game. Now, there was a demo, which I forgot to grab before I made this video, and I don't feel like editing and everything, but there was a demo of this that was released on another Squaresoft game that I can't think of for the life of me. Which one it was? Was it Tobal? Anyway, whatever. To give people an idea of what was coming, and it was brilliant. I mean, it was absolutely brilliant. And I remember day one, I just talked all about the hype. I mean, the hype was real. There's no question about that. Sony put everything into this game. And I love reading like the back of the case here. Quite possibly the greatest game ever made. Game Fan Magazine. An epic adventure across 3 CD-ROMs. Ooh! What begins as a rebellion against an evil corporation becomes much more, and what erupts goes beyond imagination. With vivid landscapes, lush 3D animation and environments, Squaresoft's multi-million-dollar masterpiece is like nothing ever seen before, and it's only on PlayStation. And then there's another quote that says, towers over the competition in terms of graphics, sound, story, and playability. GamePro magazine. And what's so funny is if I look at the back here, all of the scenes that they have are pretty much, I mean, there's one of Ifrit, an in-game model that they have. There's no point to show you guys like this sort of stuff. But basically they're emphasizing the cinematic aspects of the game. And the hype was so real for this that it's on the back of the box. I mean, to give you an idea. And I wanted to talk about my first thoughts of playing this game, of what it was like at that time period to actually be there 20 years ago, almost 20 years ago today. And it was surreal, you know? It was like, I honestly feel that it was the passing of the torch. I like to say this a lot. PlayStation had a couple of those moments. There was Resident Evil and there was Final Fantasy VII. Resident Evil really was another passing of the torch moment because games weren't made like this before. You know what I mean? I'm used to playing Super Nintendo games, Sega Genesis games. I'm not used to playing a true, mature video game that just blew my mind. And with Final Fantasy VII, it was like Resident Evil was, you know, here's a torch, we're like Nintendo's torch, we're passing it on to the next player, but Nintendo's still holding it. You know what I mean? Like, so you're playing PlayStation and you're feeling like, wow, this is probably like the next console. Like, this is going to be where everyone plays. But you still have that mind frame of like, no, you know, like Nintendo and Sega, they're my childhood. And Final Fantasy VII was the other hand, grabbing the baton and taking off. And it really felt like that. It really felt like, no, from this moment forward, PlayStation means Final Fantasy, as an example. And I remember getting home, purchasing this very copy you see here, getting home, putting it in my on my original PlayStation, that little gray, and just booting it up and being absolutely floored by that opening cinematic. That classic cinematic blew my fragile little mind, and it went from there, and it was a brilliant RPG. And I know that's not for everyone. My personal favorite Final Fantasy game is Final Fantasy VI. I actually stopped playing the series pretty much after Final Fantasy XII. 13 didn't really connect with me. I played the demo for 15, and I'm not really feeling it either. I miss the active time battle systems. I really do. I enjoyed that for whatever reason. But I remember just being absolutely floored and saying that, wow, like Final Fantasy VII, it did it. It was like one of the first times where a game lived up to the hype, and it really did. I remember just being totally floored. I put in like 200 hours or something like that into this damn game. I still have my original save file on my PlayStation 1 memory card, and it was a brilliant game. It really was. This was an absolute masterpiece of a game that came together, and it's just, I didn't enjoy it as much as Final Fantasy VI, but what does that tell you about Final Fantasy VI? You have to play that one. It's awesome. But it was strange to go through the whole game, and when the game was done, sit back and go like, this is it. Like, this is it. I had that same moment or that same feeling with Resident Evil, and I surely had it with Final Fantasy VII, where I was like, games have changed. Like, this is it. We're moving on to another plane. Like, this is a whole other playing field here. And I had the same sort of feeling with Ocarina of Time the following year in 1998, where I was just like, wow, like things are really changing now. But Final Fantasy VII was one of those very few experiences where I found that it totally lived up to the hype. It really did. It just totally lived up to the hype for its time, and it changed everything. And it's so funny that, coming today, like, they're going to remake Final Fantasy VII, and I'm looking forward to that. I think it'll be interesting, but it'll never be the same, It'll never match what this original game did. And it's funny because we don't even have commercials like this anymore. The hype, the build up to this game. And I remember going in, God, where was it? I remember, was it Toys R Us, or did I get this one at Micro? I may have gotten this one at Micro, I don't remember. But there were, everyone was waiting to play this game. Like, it was madness, absolute madness. And I don't know if we're ever going to have something like that again. I mean, this changed everything. 2 weeks after this game was out, all of a sudden RPGs were the #1 genre for years after. Every RPG that Squaresoft released did like gangbusters. It sold so well. We went from, maybe a game selling 200,000 copies to a game selling 3.5 million copies in North America. That didn't happen. Like, it just didn't happen. And for so many people, this is Final Fantasy I to them. You know what I mean? Like, this is their first Final Fantasy game that they ever played. And, well, what a game to start with. So, that's it, guys. I just wanted a little retrospective on the game itself. I mean, I have so many great memories from it. When you finally face off against Sephiroth and you hear One Winged Angel play, that, to me, I don't know if I'll ever have a moment like that again. I was so used to hearing, MIDI files and things like that, but to hear CD quality sound, yeah, sure, for the TurboGrafx I had experienced stuff like that with the PC Engine, but not to that effect. Like, where you hear like the chorus and the people are actually singing as you're taking that guy down. I remember I was like, oh, you're going down, mofo. And I was so hyped, and just everything about that last sequence was just so amazing. And I think the game came together just brilliantly. And yeah, the series would evolve from there. And to me, I mean, it's funny, but Final Fantasy VII was sort of like the beginning of the end for me. And it's because I love 2D sprite-based games, and those RPGs were just legendary. But but this really was something. So, do you guys have any memories about Final Fantasy VII, about the hype, about anything like that? Maybe if you're too young to talk about the hype, just maybe have you played the game? Do you enjoy it? Is it one of these things where you could sort of see why it's considered a masterpiece and a classic, and why there's millions of people all over the world that are basically clamoring to get their hands on a remake of this particular game? So that's it, guys. Just a little quick retrospective on sort of like being there in 1997 and the hype, and how it was just such a monumental experience for everyone, and how it changed everything for its time. Alright guys, that's pretty much it. So leave a comment and maybe we can get a little discussion going, and that's about it. So I'll catch you all in the next video.
More than 200 animators and programmers. A multi-million-dollar production. Over 2 years in the making. And a cast of thousands. They said it couldn't be done in a major motion picture. They were right. Final Fantasy VII.
PlayStation